Hi, Sarge. How are you? Good to see you.
Really good, Stephen. How are you? Great to see you too,
Excellent.
by the way.
And I'm sorry we're not meeting in your lovely cafe by the office we were in the other day, actually, which is sorry it's got to be on Zoom, but next time hopefully it can be for real.
Next
So
time. Yeah.
yeah, good to see you. And thanks so much for talking to us today. I think just going to start by sort of talking about your background and all the areas you've been involved with. And in many ways, you are a bit of a renaissance marketing man, aren't you? You know, you've worked in large companies, small companies, consultancies, global, domestic. You worked in the Middle East. You worked in the UK, Vodafone, Bupa, Santander. I mean, you've kind of, been all these different places. What was marketing something you always wanted to do? Because I know you studied at university as well. Was it always something for you?
First of all, thanks for the very kind description. I've been called many things over the years, but never that. So that's one to add to the list.
Pleasure.
Yeah, look, I'm really lucky. I knew more or less from year three of university of a 4-year degree that marketing was my career. I'd gone to university to study something really odd like biology and computing. And
Right.
in those days, computing wasn't as it is now. In those days, it was literally trying to make heads and tails of Boolean logic, if you've ever had the pleasure, which is
Absolutely.
extraordinarily complex for somebody who doesn't think in that mode. So
Mm.
just purely by luck, I took a course in business studies as was. Of
Mm.
course, in those days, you didn't study it at school. It was only ever surfaced at university.
Yes.
And almost immediately, I knew this is what I wanted to do. And then I was able to specialize. And then, yeah, I was super clear that I wanted to work in marketing.
Excellent. And I think when we talk about the sort of the modern CMO, I mean, one of the things that I expect we talk about a lot of the DMAs, all about intelligent marketing and being a driving force for intelligent marketing, and this kind of blend of creativity and tech and data is one way. And then actually the other day I was listening to Karen Blackett talking about emotional intelligence and obviously how, as we know, that drives so much decision making. I mean, how do you describe the modern CMO? What is it that really, what are the key characteristics you need to have really?
I think the DMA description that you use really nails the heart of it for me. So it's that curious blend of creativity, and creativity obviously comes in many different forms, but perhaps another way to think about it is curiosity.
Right.
So always asking questions, always wondering why things work the way they do.
Yep.
Increasingly, that needs to be allied to the kind of the numeracy, the analytics, the rational stuff, the
Yes.
ability to convince boardrooms,
Yep.
which requires a kind of a different skill set. And I think for me, the piece that blends it all together is the emotional intelligence,
Yep.
because the ability to read a room, to get stakeholders on side, to create followership amongst teams, these things are, in a sense, almost more important than technical skills now.
Yes, absolutely right. And is that something that presumably in a very multi-stakeholder organization such as you're in and such you've been in the past, presumably, that's a major part of the role about bringing the board on side, getting everyone on the journey, and obviously being able to connect and build their relationships is really key.
It's absolutely central. In a sense, if you think about the role that the modern CMO, and we call it different things in different businesses, right? Whether it's CMO, Chief Customer Officer, Chief Commercial Officer, even Chief Digital Officer, I think the role is broadly the same,
Mm.
which is to help businesses grow by becoming more customer centric. So in order to do that, you need to pull together a really diverse set of stakeholders. Almost no other function around the corporate table needs to, we need to have an understanding of technology more than ever, an understanding of finance, operational impacts, people impacts, risk and control, and it goes on and on. And so in that sense, we really need to cover a very broad range of territories. So in order to do that, that's where I think the emotional intelligence is key.
And actually, just sort of slightly reminded me also that remember a while back when we were working together on the Marketing Society board, and we had Martin Glenn, and his whole philosophy, wasn't it? It was all about the drive from a CMO to CEO was all business failures were marketing failures. He always said. Do you think do you kind of broadly subscribe to that view still?
Yeah, no, very much so. First of all, I think that the training you get as a marketer in an organization which is kind of invested in that function is really strong. You learn a trade, if you like. That trade, I think, equips you really well for that transition to a CEO post. Unfortunately, I think what happens is often organizations go for the safe bet,
Yeah.
typically the CFO.
Yes.
But we see a lot of businesses now in the UK, a lot of business leaders who've come up the marketing route and who are being extraordinarily successful. It's just that we don't see it. We don't see so many. And I think that requires a bit of a change, because if you think about, every business in the world is battling for customers. That's a thing that unites every business in the world. So the team, the organization that has the best insight into that should be incredibly well placed to drive your entire growth agenda.
And I expect if you take yourself, obviously you've got the customer, you've got innovation, it's much, much more than marketing. It's a very progressive way of looking at the role, because you're covering so many different areas, which I expect is testimony to that kind of thinking, really, isn't it? And I mean, in innovation, I know it's a fundamental part of your role and it's in your title. I mean, how do you do that in a legacy organization? It must be unbelievably difficult, to keep innovating and moving things on.
Yeah, I mean, but almost per definition, when an organization reaches a certain size, stuff slows down. That's the nature of any bureaucracy. I mean, you'll be familiar with that very well, Stephen. So the ability to then navigate that to create more than just incremental change is super important. And I've seen different models. I'm not sort of fixated on one model. There was a time probably 10 years ago where lots of organizations viewed innovation to be something that you hired some people with beards and tattoos, you put them in an office in Hoxton, and hey presto, you had an innovation function. I've not seen that work so well, because you get tissue rejection.
Right.
So what will happen is you bring in some incredibly smart people, very entrepreneurial. You bang them up against a corporate culture, which is perhaps somewhat antithetical to that. And then when these people generate ideas, it's very hard for the business to absorb them. So I'm not saying it can't work, just saying in my experience, it's worked less well. The model we've had at Santander, and the model I think I prefer, is one where you're working with the grain of the organization. So yes, you have smart people, but there's a mix of people who are taken from within the business, some more provocative people that you bring in externally. You put the two together, you create conditions, and that doesn't have to be a separate office or anything, but they still need to have a line of sight to a business problem, or actually to a stakeholder. Often what works very well, and what works in the Santander setting, is getting a senior sponsorship from another area,
right,
to sponsor the ideas. So over the course of I've been here sort of just a year and a half, but they've got a proud legacy in Santander, which started under Sigga, who's now CMO at Tesco Bank, of course.
Right.
And Sigga sent up an incredibly strong capability, and much of what they've built has now been integrated into our business as usual, and they led us into paths which perhaps we wouldn't have found otherwise. So yes, it's extraordinarily difficult, but every organization knows that they need to do this.
Yes.
And again, it comes back, and I suspect boringly this conversation is going to come back to the notion of emotional intelligence, because so much of this is getting buy-in at the outset.
Yes, of course it is.
If you just turn up and say, look, you're all rubbish, I'm going to show you how to do innovation, in most organizations that won't work very well.
Yes, absolutely right. And also, I expect, do you find that the other challenge there is because of the very fact that it's new and you can't prove that it's going to work, therefore getting your financial colleagues on side is obviously, there's a little bit of leap of faith there, isn't there? Because once you've done it once and you prove it, then obviously you see a model, but that must be quite hard.
Strangely, it's really funny. In the last 2 or 3 organizations I've worked, I found the FD to be almost the most progressive member of the board.
Fantastic.
Good FDs will tell you, they will squirrel money away for innovation. Mm-hmm. They won't tell anybody about it, but they'll always have a back pocket.
Right.
Because these guys know the state of the business better than anybody else. They know the imperative to grow,
yes,
or to take cost out of the business. So I've never had that problem of kind of FD saying, oh no, we shouldn't invest in that stuff. They want to create capacity to do these things. But yes, of course, in order to do that, you have to do the other stuff well, the day-to-day yes, digital performance marketing, yes, getting your brand effectiveness up and running, making sure you've got really good customer models and data. But that's never been the difficulty. Where there tends to be challenges is more kind of operationally rolling out.
Right.
Where you come up against, organizations where things are done in a very precise way for a precise set of reasons, but typically not the FD.
That's very good. What about sustainability then? Because, obviously, ESG investing and all those kind of areas, and I know it's becoming increasingly a bit of a buzz in the industry, right? But obviously that's an important part of your purpose as well. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, the banks, again, the bank has quite a sort of long history of engagement around the whole kind of ESG debate, primarily driven by our executive chairman, Anna Botín. Yep. That manifested in the early days in the kind of classic stuff around making sure our operations are getting towards carbon neutral, using renewable energies, but increasingly is manifesting in the types of products and services that we're bringing to market. And some of the partnerships as well. So we've got this partnership with national parks, where we're helping them kind of restore this ecosystem around peat bogs, right, which is extraordinarily powerful in terms of carbon capture. And increasingly, our banks obviously have a huge role to play here because of the sheer capital available. Yes. And how that can be used to drive investments that drive sustainability or enable the innovation that will enable sustainability. So the bank's always played a very, very strong role here. And increasingly, I think we're going to see many more moves coming here. We've been sort of dipping our toe in the water in the UK in a number of areas, but I think we will be escalating this over the coming year. But the group commitment around the sort of financial net zero target has been in place for some time.
Yes.
And it's taken very seriously. We evaluate that internally and we're held accountable for it.
And do you predict a world, particularly with, Gen Z and everyone else coming through, where there really will be ultimately investments will be scrutinized in the way that, it would have been historically around areas like, exploitation, sort of slavery? It will become almost something where you just won't be involved. You won't invest in something that you can't prove its ESG credentials.
The scrutiny is already there, and what all of the players here and broadly across the kind of financial ecosystem is trying to find out where the pain points in the supply chain are, right? Because you build capability at the front end, but you need to understand what your suppliers are doing and their suppliers, and you need to follow it all the way through. So yeah, I think scrutiny in this area is only going to increase. At some stage, you can imagine there will be some regulation around this too. There was some discussion of this at COP26. Yeah, so I think this is nothing unique to financial services. I think all categories really need to begin preparing for this.
So how do you sort of measure yourself as a marketeer then, Sarge? When you sort of, at the end of the day, when you say, what have I done today? Or maybe at the end of the month or whatever, what are the sort of your KPIs, if you like?
I suppose I think about a couple of things. At the end of the day, and end of most days, actually, I kind of think about, have I done anything today that's moved the customer agenda forward?
Right.
That for me is probably the core of it.
Yeah.
The second part of it is, did I do something with my team that's going to help them grow today?
Right.
So I'm a great believer in, growth starts with us and our kind of strengths and development areas. We help others grow. And by growing our teams, we ultimately grow the business, right? That's kind of what I've always thought about it, that kind of sequence. And so it's always around those two things. So, did I create some positive energy for either customers or colleagues today? And I do think about that, it sounds slightly odd, but I do think about that most days. And like all of us, you're your own harshest critic.
Yes.
But as long as I can broadly say I'm doing more good than bad, I'm okay with that.
And it's almost like, from what you were saying before, it's almost like you're asking yourself those three questions every day. Is that, what do you love? How do you do better? And what sort of advice do you have? I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. Because I suppose we all have to know that we are, in the roles we're all in, moving things forward. That's so critical, isn't it? Because we're naturally those minded people. And I can see in a role like yours, it particularly when you're talking about the scale, if you don't feel as if you're making progress, it wouldn't fit nicely with the way you think anyway. So I think
that's right. The the reason we do this stuff is to make a difference in people's lives in the end.
Absolutely. Yes.
Not in a heroic way, not in a kind of Superman type of way, but making small contributions to making things better and making customers' lives and colleagues' lives easier. So that for me would be the ultimate, if I'm having an internal KPI.
Yeah.
But very closely allied to that for me is this notion of authenticity.
Yes.
Am I behaving in a way which is authentic to my own values?
Yes.
And I always look for that alignment between an organization's values and my values as I think about joining.
And as you say, as much focusing on growing and developing your internal audiences as much in your team as much it is for the customer. I mean, thinking about it.
I've always enjoyed that sort of thing, Stephen, where, whether it's kind of coaching a few years ago, the Marketing Academy, coaching young marketers,
absolutely.
Bringing young talent through. I get a lot of energy from those kinds of those developmental conversations.
Absolutely. No, very, very lucky to have you. Well, so what if you talked about, personal hallmarks as a leader on that particular point, Sarge, around leadership, so when you're doing, over the years, a lot of coaching, and you think, if you said, what is leadership? I know this is one of those general questions, but around marketing, what are the sort of things that you would say your blend, your style, your authentic approach to leadership? What would that be?
Over the course of corporate careers, we all do way too many of these 360s, right? Where I like this notion of, I don't always practice this notion of radical candor. Right?
Yes, exactly.
We're quite open about those things, but
exactly.
So I've got I think I've got a reasonably keen sense of kind of what I'm good at and what I'm not so good at, and the stuff that I think about in terms of my own leadership is a lot of it begins with kind of energy and positivity. I'm very much always been a kind of glass half full type of person. That requires a degree of kind of energy, which is just innate. I'm typically the one that's having to be slowed down rather than speed up, and that's just kind of who I am. That's just my DNA. That's my metabolism.
Yeah.
But this notion of positivity, energy, passion. I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm doing precisely what I want to be doing. I never had an ambition to be a ski instructor or a windsurfer.
Yes.
Those things would be fun, but I'm living kind of in alignment with my objectives. But also the notion of fun. We all take ourselves far too seriously in businesses.
Yes.
And so I always like to bring that element of fun. And most people, we spend way too much time at work, so most people respond to that very, very positively. And then this again, this notion of authenticity. If you ask me a direct question, I'm going to give you a pretty direct answer.
Yes.
And that sometimes works and sometimes get me into trouble.
No, but that's good. That's one of the things I've always loved about you. It's very, very clear, very direct. Know where you stand. It's brilliant, but it's important for everyone else. And one of my first bosses always said to me, if you're doing something you love, I know it sounds a really, really cliched thing, but you're probably going to do okay at it. It's like, actually you just get more excited by it, don't you? And you feel more.
That's exactly right.
Energized,
Yeah, that's exactly right. That kind of that living in alignment with your values,
yes.
Helping people unlock their own kind of growth. I've never been much interested in kind of hierarchy or formal structures, or I work with whoever kind of has the answer in the organization. Yes. But ultimately, I was very lucky. I worked for 10 years at American Express, which is one of the best organizations I've ever worked with by some margin. And I always remember the inspirational CEO there, a guy called Ken Chenault, who was one of the first Black leaders of a Fortune 500 company from memory. Yeah. Fantastic guy. But he always used to quote, use a Napoleon quote about leadership. And he used to say the role of leadership is to define reality and give hope. And I think I think that's exactly right. Right. Yeah. Here's the current reality, but we're going to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. No, wonderful. So if you look at your inside your brain, you looked at the left and the right, you looked at would you be lateral, more left, more right? What do you think if we kind of did the neuroscience on the Sarge?
Probably all over the shop. Probably all over the shop, to be honest. So whenever I do Myers-Briggs, it's weird. Yeah. I kind of veer from INTJ to ENTJ.
Right, okay.
So I'm an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert.
Yeah.
And equally on thinking about kind of left brain, right brain stuff. So I'm fairly analytical, fairly rational, fairly structured. But then at times, we'll just put all that to one side and just kind of intuitive and more feeling and empathetic. And I suppose one of the tricks of these jobs is knowing when to balance those two things.
Yes.
And that comes right back to where we started in terms of emotional intelligence.
Yes,
exactly. How to engage with your audience, how to give them what they need, and how to take from conversations what you need.
Yes. I remember someone coined the phrase diagonal thinkers a few years ago, lateral and linear, it's a balance.
Okay, right.
Balance. So
yeah.
And
I don't know. So I literally veer between the two. It's very hard to pin it down. You'd have to ask some of the guys in the team, perhaps they probably have a view.
You talked before about, I know you spent the last couple of years or so in the Middle East, and you've obviously spent a lot of time working, with lots of international businesses. Do you think would that be advice that you would give people in your career? So if you're starting out in this world now, would you say certainly traveling or being in different environments, different cultures is a critical way of growing and building your career and your leadership potential?
Yeah, 100%. I always regretted I hadn't done it earlier in my career, much earlier. And I just think it's all the cliches about travel, but it's true. Living in a different culture is profoundly broadening. Just day-to-day living is completely different. You see how other people live, you see other modes of living, you see people with very, very different values from you, different social interaction, all of which enriches you as a marketer, I think.
Yes.
You interact with a whole set of different consumers. Many of the assumptions you make about consumers, but they don't hold good anyway here, never mind in another market. So I've got one regret with my career. It's that I didn't do that when I was kind of in my 20s or 30s. It's such a profoundly enriching experience.
Let's get a bit personal now. So, give me something you won't ever compromise on in your life, because that's the other, I know you talked about authenticity, but one of the issues, of course, for all of us is as now the life work balance, or just being able to, what would you sort of, when it comes to crunch, what's the thing you would never compromise
on? If I think holistically, I used to work with a coach many years ago. He used to talk about non-negotiables.
Right.
My non-negotiables are my kids and my health.
Right. Okay.
If the kids need something, then that's always, obviously it's the same for everybody. There's nothing particularly insightful about that. But actually, a number of years ago, I made a decision around. For me, I'm not operating optimally unless I'm exercising frequently and hard.
Right.
So you get the best out of me. I get the best out of myself.
Brilliant.
By lots of physical activity, which takes all sorts of guises, but I need that to kind of recharge. So that's my non-negotiable. We're very lucky at Santander. We have this brilliant concept, which was, I think, developed by Susan Allen, who brought me into the organization, which is the simplest thing in the world, but it's really powerful, which is called Quiet Hour. So every day between 1 and 2, started during lockdown, but we've kept it. No meetings, no calls, no texts, no emails. And the idea is you go away and do something that you need to nurture you throughout the day. And so for a lot of people, that's going for a walk, or it's hanging out with the dog or the children. For me, it's going to the gym or going for a walk. And it's such a simple thing, but it just changes the whole tenor of your day. So I come back to my desk, energized and full of beans and kind of ready to go. So for me, it's the physical activity side is non-negotiable.
That is really impressive to be able to do that in a large organization like yours, have that discipline to carve out the 1 hour and give it back to go back to the re-energize or whatever you love doing to make you, I'm sure productivity goes up as a result of it, apart from the fact it's a good thing to do anyway, which is very impressive.
And it's broadly observed across the bank, right? Yeah. Almost nobody, or if you do, it's frowned upon.
Yes.
And so it's observed top down, top to bottom.
That's fantastic. Really good. Now, tell me about 60s and 70s clothing, which I understand that you got. When did you get into that? And I mean, I won't talk about what you're wearing at the moment. Maybe it's 60s or 70s. I don't know. But you've always had a fascination there. I know. And
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So I assume we're probably of a somewhat similar vintage, Stephen.
Yes.
But I kind of grew up in the 70s and 80s watching lots of
Yeah.
old spy movies.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry?
Absolutely. I remember them. Yeah.
Yeah. So sort of spy movies and just lots of, being exposed to lots of 60s and 70s Americana.
Yeah.
And I've just always loved that period. I love the optimism of that period, the notion that the world was on the brink of something, that was kind of profoundly different. There was an optimism, there was technology, there was fantastic music.
Yes.
So that's just, often you pick up things in your formative years that stayed with me. So I was a mod at school, and all this sort of stuff. So, and it's just stayed with me. I love the music. I love the fashion. Just everything from that era.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So Roger Daltrey's still touring, isn't he? The Who is still out.
That's right. Yeah. No. Funnily enough, I'm learning to ride a motorcycle just because not because it's not a midlife crisis. I had that many years ago, so I'm not going to be buying a Harley Davidson, but I will be getting a vintage Lambretta. But it's just the fun of doing something completely different.
Yeah. It's so important. Important.
So I turned up at the the motorcycle training center for my first kind of day of training. And I was the only one there who wasn't training to be an Uber driver, and they couldn't quite work out why I was here. What's this old bloke doing here?
I love that. Presumably that enables you to cycle to Spurs as well if you need to go.
Oh dear, dear, oh dear.
So what if you could reinvent yourself? What would you be then? Or maybe you're doing what you're doing at the moment, because everything you said actually suggests that you are aligned. But if there was something else completely different, either being a mod or being on stage with Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey, I don't know, but
this was a really tough question, and yeah, probably it would have been something unconstrained in fantasy world. Who wouldn't have wanted to be in a cool band?
Yeah.
Or music's a massive part of my life, so probably something musical. I used to play the drums when I was a boy, very very badly, and so maybe I'd be like a drummer in a rock band somewhere.
So favorite band then, Sarge? If you can see anyone, even dead or alive, who would you go and see?
Probably James Brown, just because.
Right. Yeah, amazing.
Just because so much of what he did is so iconic, and so changed. If you think about almost any branch of kind of modern music, he was kind of pioneering in many respects, and also pioneering civil rights, and all the rest of it. So a somewhat divisive figure, but his music and his innovation and his attention to detail, just unbelievable. And I don't think he's done a bad record.
It's amazing, and of course a lot of his work is, as they say, as my kids say, sampled, and as I say, stolen on a lot of modern,
almost any hip hop track from the 80s through to the 90s is based on a James Brown beat.
Exactly, brilliant, fantastic. Well, I'm going to finish on that note. Really, really good to speak to you, Sarge, as always.
Stephen, it's been a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you so much.